Hi, everybody. So I am so excited today because, I forgot you need to know who I am and what I'm doing. You're listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. I don't think I've ever not said who I am and what I do and what my podcast is called. So there you go. But I'm excited today. And I hate saying excited, but I kind of am, because the whole point of why I started this podcast, was to help other people. And one of the biggest things that I talk about is grief and loss and trauma. And so I am thrilled today to have an amazing therapist come on that also wrote a book. So I would like to introduce John Tsilimparis, MFT. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
He has a new book that's coming out. What's the date of the release of the book, by the way?
June 17th, 2025.
Okay, that's very exciting. Congratulations. So his book, I'm going to hold it up for all of you YouTubers. The Magic and the Tragic, Rewriting the Script on Grief and Discovering Happiness in Our Darkest Days. Can I call you John?
Yes, please.
Okay, John, you had me at hello, because this is what I am most passionate about in life. Just the intro alone of your book was like perfect. The most perfect intro of a book that I've ever read, which is, if you're somebody that has struggled with loss and grief, and my audience knows this, throughout my life, I lost my sister at a young age. I lost my best friend in my 20s. I lost my dad at 13. And so I like to talk about the fact that grief is something I'm going to carry for my whole life, but it's kind of how you deal with it. You're never going to forget them. They're always kind of going to be somewhere with you, whether it's like happy moments, a song, something like that, but it's the way that you deal with it. Yes. And I love what you say in the intro. You say, we are all going to go through it at some point, which is true.
Right. There are very few absolutes in the world, Meghan. And, one of the most important ones is that no matter who you are, no matter how rich you are, how successful you are, how attractive you are, doesn't matter how many people love you or you love, you're going to go through some kind of experience of pain, loss, adversity. And there's no escaping it. So you can hem and haw about it, and you can do everything in your power to avoid it or run away from it. But running away from it would be going against the natural order of things. So because pain is such a big part of being human, one of the best things we can do for ourselves, and I think this is the highest form of self-care, is to try to transform that pain into grief empowerment as opposed to grief avoidance. And so meaning that you and I, everyone that goes through grief, has to try to find the aesthetic in the pain and even the beauty in the suffering. And by doing that, you honor it, but you also reduce the pain. And this is how you build emotional resilience. This is how you create an inflection point in your life where you don't run from the pain. You actually look for some kind of dignity in it. And one last thing I wanted to say about that is, I talk a lot about philosophy and poetry and music in the book. And there's this great reference to the ancient Greeks, because the ancient Greeks believed in the nobility of suffering. And this was the kind of nobility that you took pride in having suffered. So they held grief and loss in very high regard.
Okay. So what I would like to ask you is, I always ask people, tell me about yourself in the beginning. Why did you get into this? I find that most people that are either therapists or psychiatrists have a passion for it. It's something they might have had their own troubled childhood, or they might have dealt with hard things growing up. Tell me a little bit about you and why you got into this, if you're comfortable.
So early in my life, there was tragedy in my family. There was a loss. one of my siblings. And, I found myself not in therapy. My family was not in that mindset. And so I found myself dealing with a lot of grief that I didn't know how to deal with. And it was little by little that I started to realize that, there was also splendor in some of my pain. There was also some dignity in the struggle. And so I started to take note of things. I started to listen to music differently. I started to absorb and enjoy nature a little bit better. I started to pay attention to art and stuff. And I found that even though that didn't make the pain go away, it helped me to manage the pain a little bit better. And so by exalting my grief, I turned it into something a little bit differently. And then there was also more tragedy later on in my life. So I guess I was rooted in grief early. And so it taught me to find different ways to deal with it.
I would love your opinion on this, because some people, when I say it to them, they think it's really odd, but I'm an odd person, so whatever. But I have always kind of thought of my grief and the pain that I carry with me as kind of a superpower. I know that sounds odd, or it could sound odd to somebody that doesn't really understand it. But I love that you do, because in your book, you do tap into music and art. And I think it's such an important piece of dealing with it. So for example, I was an actress at a young age, and I did musical theater and sang my entire life. Okay. So whenever I hear a song and it reminds me of that person, sometimes I might be driving, because I'm spiritual. I believe in signs and all different kinds of things that they're with us. But, you could be driving down the street and all of a sudden some song might come on.
Yes.
And it's this feeling of kind of really could be really painful one day, right? Mm-hmm. When you hear it. But then the next day you could be listening to it 2 weeks later, it randomly pops on again. And that day, it catches you and it makes you happy. Isn't that crazy?
That's great. So what I call that, Meghan, is that's you having and developed your aesthetic mindset. And you can do that with music. You can do it with art, but that's you creating a different experience. You're creating a different relationship with grief. And so, with nature, for me, I can make the sunsets shine a little more colorfully, and I can make the glow of the moon to me be more poetic and stuff like that. So music can do the same thing. And so the aesthetic mindset is based on what they call now, and there's a lot of science around this, called awe inducement, which is they're figuring out how when you turn to awe, like a song that you love or art or something in nature, you're creating something. You're creating sort of new inroads in the brain, and then the right chemicals in your mind, like serotonin and oxytocin, are secreted, and so it actually makes us feel better. But at first, it's hard because we have to learn how to pair it with those difficult moments. Then, little by little, your grief, whatever you're sad about, whatever you're stressed out about, it could be a divorce, it could be a loss of a business, it could be a faded dream. Those distresses start to get associated with curiosity, with splendor, and with personal growth.
Okay, so my question to you is, because I know you have a very impressive resume and you've taught and you've done all kinds of things. Why this book? Because there's so many books talking about grief. I talk a lot about, I love to read this book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote on death and dying. And I don't know if you've read The Wheel of Life, but it's one of my favorite books. Have you ever read The Wheel of Life?
Not that one, but I know Kubler-Ross very well. She's sort of like the guru of death and dying.
Yes. So she wrote this book, and in the intro, I don't know where it was in the book, but in the book, she talks about these people that were going into a concentration camp. And they etched butterflies on the walls. So when they went into the concentration camp after the people had passed, it was almost like this sign of rebirth. And it's always kind of struck with me in a touching way of like thinking about death in a different way. And I think what
Yes.
caught me about your book, because I interview a lot of people about trauma and grief,
Yes.
is that the way that you talk about it, it doesn't have to be so awful. You know, it doesn't have to be so painful. So tell me, of all the books there are out there, right? Because there's millions. Why did you decide to write this particular book?
Because I work as a grief and death counselor and grief and loss counselor. And I wanted to flip the script on grief. I wanted to give people a different experience. And that, that not only you can live with grief and you can face it and you can accept it. We all know that. I'm talking about taking it a step even higher. I'm talking about exalting it. I'm talking about venerating it in big ways. And this way you are building the kind of emotional resilience that's going to get you prepared for what's coming. Because as we know, there's a lot of chaos going on in the world right now. There's a lot of people worried about all kinds of things, from political divisiveness to wars overseas, the economy, everything. And so ever since the pandemic began, I've just been getting different questions from people like, am I going to have enough money to take care of my kids and my family in the future? What about this? What about that? What about the value of my home? So there's so much adversity right now. And I just thought, let's try to change the dialogue. Let's create new inflection points with something that is going to come anyway. You don't have to look for grief. It's going to come, and it might come tomorrow. It may not come for a couple of weeks, but I call grief just anything that we are worried about, anything that we have lost, or doesn't have to be a person. It could be a disappointment. It could be a financial hardship, anything like that. So in answer to your question is, I wanted to change the dialogue and create a game-changing type of intervention around grief that everyone experiences.
I think it's so important how you bring up what's going on in the world right now. And just, it's a really, in my lifetime at least, I have never dealt with this reality of so much hatred and pain. And I feel like people are nasty, and there's just a lot of sadness in the world right now, right? And so go ahead if you wanted to touch on that.
No, there is. And that's why I was saying, I think people are asking different types of questions.
Yeah.
In the old days, you could tell people that, well, this school shooting was an isolated incident and these things don't happen that often. Well, we can't say that anymore. During the pandemic, I couldn't say to my patients, well, this is probably going to end in a couple of months and everything's going to be fine. We didn't know that. So we didn't know how long it was going to last. So it's just a different time, and it's a different way to. So again, this is a different way to process things that we usually take for granted, and actually infuse a little bit of inspiration in it. And that's why I chose to write the book.
So as far as like if you were somebody and you're dealing with severe anxiety, like I've dealt with anxiety throughout my life pretty badly. And you live in fear. Okay. And you are wondering, I have my mom's 80, she won't be here forever. I'm somebody that gets so worried all the time. Like, when is the next loss? Like the PTSD, because I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, is always there. And there's things I do and therapy and other things I do to try and help with it, but it's always there. And I think if you said you went through loss as a young kid, or there's a lot of us that have, what do you say to somebody like me that could maybe read the book and use it, that has that underlying fear of always thinking the worst? Like, anytime my daughter goes out on a bike, I'm scared something's going to happen to her. I'm constantly living in fear.
Well, I think it's human nature to try to resist the fear and to resist those thoughts and to fight them. What I try to do is, in the same principle of embracing grief and seeking grief empowerment instead of grief avoidance, I would also say the same thing with anxiety and worry, which is, if I start to accept that each day I'm going to have some worries, and that I don't plan and wish and hope that I have a really, really good day today, then paradoxically my day isn't so bad, because I'm expecting myself to worry today. So it's trying to put aside the aversion to, oh my God, I can't feel anxious today because it's so overwhelming, and to try to sort of coexist with it in a way that you are accepting that it's going to come and that I can handle it. Lots of times what anxiety does is it makes you overestimate whatever your fears are, and it makes you underestimate your ability to handle it. So in learning how to handle it in the same way you do with grief, you can do that with anxiety and worry as well. Similar principle.
Can you tell me some kind of like takeaways or things in the book that, you know, you give people to kind of deal with this kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's so many. Again, I think the main thing for me is to try to communicate to people that running from grief is, again, not in your best interest. It's not that you want to embrace grief or look for it, but to try not to be afraid of it and think of it in terms of what they call allostasis. Allostasis is this science that involves you walking towards your grief as opposed to running away from grief. This way, you start to create a new normal where you're not so startled by the grief and you are trusting that the grief is not going to kill you. It's going to make you feel uncomfortable, but it's not going to kill you. So I try to tell people to try to think of it as this is discomfort. It's not danger. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't have to run away from this. I can acknowledge that I don't like it and that it's painful right now, but it's only discomfort.
So are there like exercises throughout the book or things that people can do? Like, for example, if you're somebody that has newly lost somebody and you're in those, you know, obviously I don't believe, and there's different thoughts on the stages of grief because I think everybody deals with it in different ways. But if you're somebody that's in that very initial period, right, where you can't move and you're just stuck, what are some things that they might be able to learn from the book?
Each chapter in the book has exercises to help you apply what you just read in the chapter. So, for example, in one chapter about dealing with closure and the myth of closure, I ask people to write themselves a sympathy letter or a sympathy card, just a short paragraph, and giving yourself all of the compassion and all of the time and all of the grace and all of the love that you would give to somebody else, who had a loss. So you're giving it to yourself in a way that maybe you deserve and that will make you feel better. That's one exercise. Another exercise in the beginning is to start noticing and being a thought detective and a stimulation detective, to think about, you know, a particular song that really moves you. What is it about that song or the lyrics that really have meaning for you? And what's a famous place in nature not a famous place, a great place in nature that you love, that you visited when you were a kid or that you visit now? Why does that place make you feel so good? And then also think of any art medium, could be painting, could be sculpture. And you take those three, for example, there's others too, and then you write down exactly what it is about that makes you feel good. And you keep that close by so that whenever you feel sad or you're feeling very down about something, you can remind yourself that within that pain, there's also a lot of beauty too. So that exercise is my favorite because it's the easiest one for people to do. Doing inventory about things you love is pretty easy to find out.
I think it's hard too. I mean, I love that you bring up nature because I live at the beach. I think you're an LA person too, right? Am I wrong on that?
I'm in West LA, yeah.
Okay, Manhattan Beach. So for me, I talk about it a lot on the podcast that I love nature. I love living at the beach. I sometimes, when I'm going through something really hard, I'll just walk on the strand and I'll look out at the ocean. And it's a form of therapy for me just to be able to do that. So I think, you know, like you said, if somebody is in those very initial stages where, you know, you almost don't want to go on sometimes and you're dealing with all the thoughts, right?
That's right.
So I think that that's so important. Like every day it's like little baby steps, right?
Yeah. So instead of doing everything in your power to push your sadness away, you want to try to pair your sad feelings with examples of beauty, so that you're looking for the beauty in it, not necessarily the happiness. And think about this, Meghan, if you are always rigorously searching for happiness, right? You're kind of inferring that you don't have it in the moment. you're basically depriving yourself of other beautiful things in your day, in your relationships, because you're saying that right now I'm not happy, so those things aren't important. So you want to try to look for that inspiration instead of the black and white, I'm either sad or either I'm happy. So the goal is to rewire your brain to be inspired by your sadness, not to be afraid of it. And if you think about it, that's a huge game changer, because that is going to make you almost fearless in the future about grief that's going to come. It's kind of like what the famous Buddhist American author Pema Chodron says. She says that this kind of work is like training to be a peaceful warrior. You're fighting in the battle, but you're not necessarily trying to resist it. You're being a warrior because you're taking it in and you're accepting it at the time.
I love that you brought that up too. I think like it is some sort of training, right? Mm-hmm. It's training your life and yourself to live a life in a different way.
Exactly. You know what you're doing? You're learning to give yourself chills every day. You know how when you listen to a great song or you have a great moment or there's a movie that you watch that gives you chills or whatever? What if you could do that for yourself? Give yourself chills every day by pairing, again, those examples of beauty with sad moments in your life.
I've never really thought about it. And I do think about this probably more than I would say most, but I love the idea of all of those things. So I have a question for you. I know that you're also a podcaster. Can you tell my listeners what your podcast is called?
It's called Mindfulness for the Soul. And it's really a podcast about helping people find some space in their lives to discover their quiet mind. It's about relaxation. It's helping people with, psychological tips throughout the day, coping skills, coping tools. I did a lot of it from the pandemic up until about 2024, and I haven't done a few entries recently because I've been so focused on the book, but I'm going to be adding some more episodes soon. So it's kind of like your daily dose of affirmations and good thoughts and relaxation.
Do you think that that's, obviously you believe in that, but do you think that piece of it is important in like the grieving process? Like you talked about the letter. Do you think like the affirmations, meditation, that kind of stuff is really important, right?
I do, because if you are too distracted or you are using drugs and alcohol or you avoiding or you're running or doing everything in your power to get away from this pain, the brain doesn't learn how to habituate to the pain. And I always know that whenever I do this and I'm worried about something or I'm remembering people from my past that I miss, if I can find the inspiration in it, then 5, 10, 15 minutes later, I switch from feeling sort of desperate with my feelings to having a lot of gratitude about my feelings. And I think that meditation and finding your quiet mind helps you do that.
I think it's important too, like, for me, I feel like every loss that I had in my life, I've dealt with in a different way. So I don't know about you, but when it was the initial loss of my sister, I was very little, so I don't remember it. But when I dealt with my dad, I was so angry. And I think like we haven't really touched on anger, but I was 13. I was so angry that my life that was full, with this great parent had just been like stripped of me. And then my mom remarried my mom's fine, understands, but he was a monster. And it was like my whole life was just taken away. And I dealt for years with the anger piece of it. And then when I lost Julie, my best friend, in my 20s, I realized it was like almost like a lesson that I knew what I did wrong the first couple of times, that I'm not going to do it this time. And instead, I decided to live more like she did. And because she was this amazing human being. And so I kind of was like, well, I'm going to be more like her in the following ways. I'm not perfect. I talk about it all the time. I can be a real pain in the butt, but I try. That's part of why I do this, to do something in her honor. And it kind of really helped me with my own grieving process that I'm still dealing with all these years later.
Anger is one of the stages of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross paradigm.
Yes.
So anger is a big part of grief too. And that's why art, music, and all these examples of inspiration that we're talking about lets us work through the anger and the emotions in a safe environment, instead of leaving you feeling devastated about it. And, the cliche is true. The only relief from the grief is in the grieving. So when you are accessing inspiration, you are grieving. You're just pairing it with something inspirational as well. So yeah, anger is the second step of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross paradigm. Now, she describes it as you don't have to do it in a linear way. Any stage works at any time, but depression is the first one, and then the second one is anger.
And like not everybody deals with it at the same time. I talk about that all the time. Like you could be totally fine for a while and then you're just angry all these years later. And that's kind of what happened to me. Yeah. Yes. So I love that you're bringing that up.
The first one is not depression. It's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. I apologize.
Well, you are now in trouble because you were wrong, and I'm joking. So my next thing, and one of my last questions is, I love that you brought up leaning on addiction, leaning on alcohol in the grieving process. I know in my 20s, right, when I lost Julie, who I talk about all the time on the podcast, that's exactly what I did. I didn't want to deal with it. I, hit the bottle. I was like, I'm not dealing with this. I want to be like Julie. I'm going to kind of, do the avoidance piece of it. I'm not going to be angry like I was with my dad, but I am going to heavily lean on having fun and drinking until I got to a point years later where I talk about this very openly on the podcast. In 2020, I kind of had my breakdown, and I went, all like the perfect storm of the bubbling of all of this stuff for years and years came to a point where I couldn't hide behind drinking. I couldn't hide behind avoidance anymore. So can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. Remember, if you're treating depression, grief, loss since alcohol is a depressant, if you're treating depression with a depressant, that's a very poor indication for your future. It's going to make your grief worse. There's no growth in that. You are numbing yourself. You're not feeling the feelings, as cliche as that sounds. So you kind of have like an arrested development in terms of you being able to lean into the pain and allow yourself to grieve. I think it's very hard to heal when you are using mood-altering substances to try to make yourself feel better. It may work for maybe 45 minutes or an hour each time, but as you continue to gradually do it, that time seems to shorten and shorten and shorten. And eventually it could lead to self-destruction.
Yeah. And I think too, just to piggyback on that, I think the greatest gift is like feeling our feelings and being in our feelings. Like I said in the beginning, you could one week listen to a song and it hits you a certain way and you're crying behind the wheel, right, of the car driving. And then like a week later, I'll hear the same song and it hits me and I'm happy. So I think, right?
Yeah, I think the mind can be a very good historian if we allow ourselves to experience some of the depths, the scary depths of our depression. And then we also see that hours later, sometimes days later, sometimes weeks later, we come out of it slowly. We have a different perspective. Things feel differently. We have a different feeling about it, a different definition to it. The mind remembers that and starts to realize that, you know what, I was so deep in it a month ago, but I came out of it and it didn't involve any kind of outside help. I didn't outsource like alcohol or other things for that. And so the mind starts to learn that, and that's the way we heal. We remember that we can go through it, but we need to go through it first. That's why, again, the only relief in the grief is in the grieving.
Do you think, like kind of last question, but do you think that we can ever really fully heal?
That's a great question, Meghan. I think that we can change the way that we can alter the pain to where it's a little more tolerable. But I don't think that we can heal from a loss. And maybe that's part of being human, is that that loss and living with that loss helps us to live better. It gives us more pause. It helps us appreciate things more. And also always remembering that this person's life or this thing that we lost meant something to us. And it restructured our lives and created something in us that we always remember. I think that's important to have. Hence the, like the ancient Greeks that have that sort of nobility in suffering. So I guess in answer to your question, I don't think you ever heal from a big loss, but you can certainly manage it a little bit better and create new meaning.
I think too, that it makes us more empathetic people. As long as you're dealing with it in the healthy ways, like we talked about, and you're not in like that anger piece, but just to be, whenever I feel like I relate so much to people, I know pretty quickly if I'm going to relate to you when I talk to you, because most people I talk to as a podcaster have gone through something. Yeah. And so I immediately connect with those people because it's like a bonding thing. Oh, you went through this. I went through this.
Yes.
And that's why I say I said earlier, it's a superpower of mine, because the pain and all the hard things that I went through also made me an empathetic person, which I think is a gift, and not everybody has it.
Yes. I think that wound increases the sensitivity of the heart. And in my book, The Magic and the Tragic, I talk about two concepts, which is learning how to create constructive aching, where your pain, again, as we've discussed, is constructive, and it helps me appreciate things better. It helps me be kinder to people. It helps me respect my alone time, things like that. Makes me look at things more beautifully. And then the other one is allowing myself to be positively wounded in a way where I'm not bitter about my wound. I have faith in the fact that it's going to do me good later on in the future. Imagine if we put as much faith in the sorrowful, Meghan, as we do in the happy aspects of life. Imagine that if we took stock in the sorrowful, our lives would be vastly different. But we can't get to that sorrowful unless we do experience some grief, as you have and I have. I
think it's so true, and I do talk about that. We celebrate birthdays, like when somebody's born, it's the happiest thing. But we live our lives afraid to talk about loss, afraid of, like I mentioned earlier, someone dying. Like, how many more years do I have with my mom? Instead of being like, well, this is a celebration. In many cultures, they celebrate death in a way that Americans or certain Western countries just can't do. Because we live in this society of like, get everything we can. I need this. I need that. I need this. And it's really just to cover up this thing, which is inevitably we're not going to be here forever.
That's right. And there's a chapter in the book called The Myth of Closure. And I discuss how, you're right, in many, many cultures, especially in the past, people used to gather in town centers. They used to gather everywhere and talk about the departed and talk about how much this person's life meant to them and stuff. And sometimes they would drag it out for weeks. But yes, in the United States, cry and you cry alone, laugh and people laugh with you. It is that. It's like, closure is seen almost as a destination. And I don't see it as a destination. I see it as a process, something that you live with. And so, in this culture, you want to move quickly away from any kind of suffering. Suffering is a dirty word in the United States. And when it comes to grief, it shouldn't be.
Well, I think that we're all learning right now that we maybe took advantage of the life that we've been gifted so long. And now we're in a kind of crisis mode of having to deal with new things, new wars, new loss, all different kinds of things. And I love that you brought up that this is a form of grief, because it is. It truly is. Being worried to turn on the news every day. What happened today? And it's how you deal with it, right? So I think it's so important.
And I also think that it's good to stay up to date, but you don't want to saturate. So I do suggest that you exercise, news hygiene and don't flood yourself with too much news. Stay informed, but don't saturate, as I just said. And so that's part of self-care too. And
John, I feel like you're talking directly at me because I am obsessed with watching the news or listening. So I think you knew that before. I'm joking. It's true.
Yeah.
I personally have to find better ways because it's just like you become a sponge and then you live in fear, and that adrenaline does not help us at all. So take it in doses is a perfect thing to say right now.
It's too much. It's too much. And it's not, try not to feel bad if you think, a responsible person should be keeping up to date. I don't think so. I think you need to pull back. I think it's just too much distress and too much trauma right now in the news all day long, whether you're happy with the current situation in the United States or not. It's just too much. And so, the sort of sense of dejection is too intense. So one needs to pull back.
Okay. Well, I loved meeting you today. Your book, The Magic and the Tragic, I'm going to finish the whole book. I've read pieces of it, and I just can tell the listeners it's a beautifully written book. John, I loved meeting you today. What's your podcast? Tell everyone where they can find you. Repeat that one more time for everyone.
It's called Mindfulness for the Soul, and it's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and anywhere else where podcasts are available. And The Magic and the Tragic, the book, will be out June 17th in bookstores, but you can pre-order it now on Amazon.
Okay, I can't wait for everyone to read it. John, it was so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on. Everyone, if you're so inclined, please go to Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to me, and leave me a review. I'm horrible about asking, and I'm just asking you to do that for me, so I'm trying to be better. Remember, you matter, your story matters. Keep going. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Meghan.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.